My husband's the head of the Riverfest in
What is
Wales.
this, the content of this meeting? Oh, you're gonna start streaming. Of course. I
Yes.
have to say, okay.
Rachel, you
My
look
husband's
lovely.
the head of.
Right.
Whoa.
Oh, thank you.
She's really, we're just going blah, 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 blah. And Rachel's like, come on it.
I'm doing stuff in the background. That's
Well,
why
she
you see
knows
my
what
face
she's
just like
doing.
really concentrated because I'm like,
I thought you had taken belladonna, look, shows you, but do you know what belladonna is? Nobody knows that anymore. It's a nightshade,
Oh,
and women used to
I did.
put it in their eyes and uh to make them look big black eyes, except it's poison.
yeah.
Somebody was telling me yesterday about her mother using carbon paper and a typewriter, and I'm laughing because, of course,
That's how you do it.
she was trying to explain this to me.
My God, I've never ever, well, no, only one other time have I been as happy about technology as when I got a computer.
Huh.
Uh, and the second one was when we got actually good internet here. That was the second time. There was a lot of time between those two, but when I got my first computer, to be shut from those typewriters where if you
Oh
can
my
type like
God.
I do, you'd have to keep retyping the same page, and just gets
You
worse.
mean you remember carbon paper?
Yeah,
Rachel, do you know what that is?
Very, very, very vaguely.
I
I've never actually used a typewriter. Like, I've, of course, I've seen them and I've like clicked on them, but I've never really used one.
I used to have one of those little Olivettis. Oh, and then I had one of those typewriters where you could erase the last 10 or 15 characters.
How to
That
do
Wow.
that?
Wow.
it had a special ribbon that
Wow.
lifted the letter off the paper basically,
Huh.
and it had a little memory. Like it had that much memory. It had like a mini chip. It was probably this big, the chip, but uh and so it was a Japanese brand. What was that brand? I can't remember the name of it. But I remember one time I was doing all-nighters to get the papers done. This is for undergrad. And but I also had a really, really, really bad cold. And I was coughing like crazy. So I was popping codeine to try and do it. And I was getting stoneder and stoneder. And finally, I ran out of correcting the ribbon. And so I was waiting for my husband to get home from work so that he could go get some correcting ribbon because I had sort of caught on that maybe I shouldn't be driving. And so I ran out to meet, he came walking home. Ran out to meet him with the ribbon in my hand saying, I can't go on. I don't have any correcting ribbon. Yeah. Ugh,
We will be joined tonight by my husband, so
good.
The real Tom.
The real Tom will be here. So
Yes.
do you want to let people in or not yet? It's up to you, Rachel. You are the boss.
Oh, no, I think Jane's the boss.
Jane is the
I
boss.
don't know what time it is.
I
4 minutes to 7.
Oh,
think
what? Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I'm going to start taking. There's 7 now. Do you want me to do the rating room as well, too?
the what? The waiting room? No, I can do it.
Oh, okay. I usually only let people in I know, just if I'm also doing it. But hello, everyone.
But they're not unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be open. Like we haven't even talked about that, like with the conversations, right? But so we're letting people in. It's a little bit before 7 yet. We encourage that you have your visuals on and that that you ask questions. But you don't have to, of course. Oh, and I need to. There we go. Thank you for remembering.
This time.
So I'm going to put the link to Jane's book in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Here we go. It's not time yet, so everybody can talk if they want to.
Some folks are probably still eating.
Yeah, and we also we have good weather topics though. Here too, we encourage you to put your name and affiliation, and if you have one, and email address in the chat. Oh,
Okay. Okay.
and just so that maximizing the amount of networking that everybody can do with everyone is the idea, always. So I put the link to Jane's book in the chat. Let's see what other links I'm going to put in the chat. I have another link.
All right. For everybody just joining us, we're gonna wait, I think a couple more minutes probably, to see if anyone comes in a couple minutes late. And then we'll get started. And if anyone's joining us on YouTube, we will do our best to monitor the live stream for any questions or comments. So, but bear with us because we're monitoring quite a few different things at once.
When she says we, she's talking about herself. So she's doing 5 tasks at once. Which is amazing. So again, we encourage people to show that they are alive and turn on their videos if they feel like it, of course. We encourage you to participate as we start to, when we start, after we start. And it's very silent. How about that ice? Hi, Tom. I see you. The real Tom.
The
We've
real
so,
one, yeah.
we've so often had the had the fake Tom.
Yeah, me. I also saw Kevin Delaney, who's a friend and wonderful, and my first reader.
That is wonderful. Good for him. Hi, Kevin. Thank you
Hi
for doing.
there. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Kevin. You were wonderful to me. Thank you. It's so
I'm
nice
looking
to
forward to
see
it.
you.
Congratulations. And I picked up the book today and plowed my way through the first half. Really nicely done. Important contribution for our region's history. Yeah.
So Kevin was the head of the Wayland High School History Department, one of a kind, just really
Thank
a
you.
very special teacher with a very special gift. So nice
Well,
to see you, Kevin.
nice to see you too, Jane. Thank you.
That's great. Good company we have tonight. People from all across the state. That's good too. And again, we encourage you to put your name and affiliation and or email in the chat, because we always encourage networking and communications between people in the history field. So, do you want to start, Rachel? And do you want me to take over admitting or?
Yep, sounds good.
Hmm.
All right, so everyone, welcome to the first installment of a new series on the History Studio, an online platform hosted by the Mass History Alliance. The History Studio is open to anyone and any subject in Massachusetts history in any form, subject, of course, to the approval of the Mass History Alliance Commons Committee. If you're interested in showing a film, presenting on a topic, trying out a talk or workshop, or showing your research, fill out the form link that is posted in the chat. And Loon, if you could post it one more time.
I will do that.
Thank you. So if you would like to present a history studio, you'll be responsible for providing PR language as well as an image, and we will schedule a Zoom meeting with you and send out and promote the studio via our usual channels, as well as provide you with a host to run the IT and open the program. But the content's up to you. Now, this series in the History Studio that we're about to start is on authors and publishing in Massachusetts history. It's created and hosted by a member of the Commons team, Plune Boretius. She's self-published 4 of her own books and has developed an interest in the state of publishing in Massachusetts history. Upcoming authors include David Whitemeyer on March 12th and Elizabeth Sheehy on April 2nd. The series will also include a conversation on the Commons about publishing in Massachusetts history in late March, and details on that are forthcoming. Keep your eye on your email inbox for those details. Then finally, next Friday, February 28th, the Mass History Alliance is hosting a conversation on the Commons with people from major funders in the Massachusetts history field to discuss what grants are subject to upheavals due to the recent shakeups in federal funding and which are not, as well as how to trace your organization's funding sources and determine which are federal, which are state, which are private, and hopefully you can, it can help you or your organization figure out what's at risk. The registration link for that will be in the chat. So that's next Friday, February 28th at 12 p.m. And now I'm going to introduce Plune Boretius, who's our host or our moderator today. Historian and building contractor Plune Boretius is a member of the Commons Committee of the Mass History Alliance. She's the principal of Swift River Press Public History and Communications, working with historical organizations on their planning and projects, as well as the management of their historic buildings. She was also the founding president of the Mass History Alliance. Previously, she was the assistant director of Mass Humanities and a lecturer in history and literature at Harvard University. Her alter ego is writer and photographer Agatha O, and she's at work on a history of her family's activities in the Netherlands and England during World War II. So, Plune, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for that nice introduction. And hi to everybody here. It's good to see you. And I'm just going to say it for those who came in after I last said it. We encourage that you turn on your video and that you participate as we start moving. This is the first history studio on authors and publishing in Massachusetts history. And it's basically going to be a series of interviews with authors. But I'm not, and I know Jane is not. We are not people who want things to be exclusive. So I will encourage you to pipe up with your questions, and I bet you that Jane can take it, um, and uh, and do that. So if you have any thoughts about who I might invite for this series, I have it set for the spring, but in the fall I'm going to have I'm hoping to continue. So if you have some ideas about who else I might invite, also from a diverse set of publishers and or publishing modes, then I'd be very interested and I'd be very happy if you sent me a line. Um, my email is in the chat. Okay, so today we're welcoming Jane Sciacca, who I know very well, have worked with for a long time now on the Commons Committee, and whose new book, Enslavement in the Puritan Village, has been published by the History Press this month. Hot off the press, here it is. They sent me a copy, which I thought was very nice, and it is fantastic. I love it. So I'll let you know that in advance, and I'm hoping I'm not a puffer. I mean, I hope you know I'm not a puffer. Let's put it that way. All right, let me read you the blurbs a little bit, and then we'll talk to Jane. But first, I want to just simply congratulate Jane on getting to this point. And I know your book is already starting to make a lot of waves, so that's great, you know. Colonial Sudbury, which is modern day Wayland and Sudbury, Massachusetts, was designated the quintessential Puritan village by Sumner Chilton Powell in his 1964 Pulitzer Prize winning history of the founding of this New England town in 1638. Yet this quiet rural village, like many others in New England, also had a darker history that is often overlooked. Sudbury's early inhabitants, including some of the most prominent citizens in town, held and sold enslaved black people throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Never before published, these stories from preserved records highlight the lives of men, women, and children held in bondage. The accounts of life in colonial Sudbury and their interactions with nearby towns, including bills of sale, marriages, medical and military records, expand the knowledge of enslavement and its pervasive impact, yet unquestioned acceptance in Sudbury and similar pre-revolutionary New England villages. That's about the book. Now let me tell you about Jane. Jane Sciacca is a retired ranger in the National Park Service with a degree in history education from Simmons University. Her work as an interpreter for the MPS in Concord, Boston, and Cambridge led to an interest in New England slavery and abolition, and her researching enslavement and abolition in her own community of Wayland, of which this book is the result. In addition, she has written and published a children's book, as well as created and written numerous programs and articles on enslavement and abolition, including on the seminal abolitionist Lydia Maria Child, also of Wayland. Jane has been an active member and officer of the Wayland Historical Society and the Wayland Historical Commission. Her overriding passion lies in telling stories of persons overlooked in history books, including the enslaved, 19th century abolitionists, and women. So that's the blurb. That's the one that Jane prefers, which is something I'm going to ask about later on. So here's my opinion. Telling stories is what Jane does really well. We often talk about people who do not otherwise stand out as statistics. As in, if I get divorced a fourth time, I'll be a statistic. And statistics is where many historians of those whose lives are underdocumented and historically untold have to go to find a story to tell. But for the history of the enslaved in New England, even statistics are hard to come by. There is so little information. And yet, there are stories to tell that, although almost of necessity incomplete, tell us a whole lot more about what is going on than simply the one incident or a bit of information. All it takes is intimate knowledge of the field, historical imagination, empathy, and a gift for telling the story. After reading this book, I now know that Jane has all three in spades. Thank you, Jane, and welcome to the History Studio.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Float. We get together for the program committee, so I
Right.
get a chance to see you quite often.
So I'm really, flattered that that you offer to be the kickoff of this program. Um, I'd love to start by hearing from you about the title of this book, Enslavement in the Puritan Village. First of all, what is the Puritan Village and what period does it cover?
Okay, well, the Puritan Village is the title that was given by Sumner Chilton Powell to uh, his book, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1964. And what he did is he wanted to research the founding of a New England town. And he wanted to look at not only the founding, but what brought them uh, from England to America. And he looked for towns that had good documentation, and he found it in Sudbury. So let me explain what Sudbury is. So today, Sudbury and is its own independent town, and Wayland is its own independent town. And I venture to say that a lot of people who live in Wayland or Sudbury have no idea that it was ever one town together. But that's the period that I study. So incorporated in 1639 as Sudbury, it really started, I should say, on the Wayland side, and it was one town until 1780. So that is the Puritan village and that's the period that I cover, and that's also the period where enslaved people were uh, living here.
So, in other words, despite the Puritan in the title, it takes us a little bit beyond
Well,
into,
right.
yeah.
So as I said in the book, the fact is, even at the point of the Revolution, you have their English ancestry. They're all English ancestry that are living here. Many of them are descendants of the original settlers. So indeed, they are the children of the Puritans. And the book, The Puritan Village, covered Sumner Chilton Powell's the period from the settlement in 1639 and even before that, life in England, and it pretty much ended by about 1660, his book. So obviously this is a continuation of what he wrote in a very different way, because he did not mention enslaved people.
No, and that's the point, isn't it? That
Mhm.
enslavement in the Puritan village. So I wanted to ask you about your use of enslavement, which I really thought it was a really good word because it's like a process or an activity as well as a result, and so I really like your use of enslavement as
Well,
opposed to,
that has now become the most accepted designation for people who were enslaved. But 25 years ago when I started, and I probably used slavery more than I want to admit, but it was History Press that asked me if I would. So they get the credit for that. They asked me if I would be okay calling it enslavement. And as long as the message got out, it was fine with me.
and your book really truly covers the activity of enslaving. So
Yes, it
that is
does.
really, it really covers the load. So we're going to talk about three things today. So first is what's in the book. And so it seems to me that and what you do in the book is you take evidence that you have found and you have found more maybe than you expected. We'll talk about that maybe in a minute. And then you unpack it into stories about people. And I love how you do a really great job. It, just simply teasing out information and then about this person, even when there's very little evidence. And I was wondering, um, um, because I don't know when I'm trying to ask a question,
Okay.
enslavement was so matter of fact to the colonials. I'm just going to call them colonials for the moment. That they didn't talk about it, and maybe they were even a little bit embarrassed about it. I don't know. They didn't talk about it much. So you have to make it unmatter of fact, and so you're doing that by teasing out these personal stories. Can you tell me a little bit about one or two of them, maybe that you do in the book, pieces of information that you really tease about?
Well, I think that first of all, it's very hard to study uh, and look for the word slave in colonial history because the Puritans didn't like it. They called them servants, and a slave was a servant for life. But when you see something in an inventory, a probate inventory, for example, and it says Cato, Negro man, worth 53 pounds, nowhere is the word slave used. But somebody that had a value to them and was sold and was listed with the livestock usually is enslaved. So first off, you have to decide who was a slave and who wasn't. And sometimes that's hard because they preferred the word servants. Even ministers were servants of God. Everybody was serving someone back then, it seemed. And so, there's a lot of instances where you have to go through a lot or just not know that the person was enslaved. But things like the probate inventories are definitely, or anybody that belonged to someone. So you don't find the word, this person is a slave. You're not going to find that.
Right. And so you do a lot of unpacking. Did you?
You do a lot of unpacking and more things that than you think are in there. I use the example, for example, the 1754 slave census under Governor William Shirley. Rachel is smiling. She works in his house. But anyway, it only designates how many males and females, and it does use the word slave, one of the rare instances where it does, but it tells you nothing about the owner, nothing about the enslaved person, but even that tells you something about it because they didn't count anyone under the age of 16. And therefore, if you were under 16, and this surfaces again in inventory in census records, that there's obviously, since your property, if you're enslaved, that if you are between the ages usually of 16 or 14 and then 45 in some instances, that's when you get charged for owning a slave because that's the most productive years
So you're
of
talking about tax records here.
text
That's
records.
another
But
place.
I mean, they're property, and that's the very sad fact.
Yeah.
And and so when you can understand that this person is property, even though he's not named as a slave, that's a very sobering experience to realize.
Yeah. I'm working on a book that takes place during the Holocaust. And
Hmm.
when I start seeing in the archives, when I start seeing the direct evidence of lists of people being made, uh,
Hmm.
of Jewish people being made who are subsequently not ever going to come back from where they go to,
Hmm.
that that really puts you like right there with your nose into it. And I
Yes.
assume that you have the same kind of experience with that. It
Well,
is
study it,
a
it's
tragic thing.
it's a painful experience. I think you have to deal with it emotionally to take on such a subject. But I just have such a strong feeling that these stories need to be told and that people need to know what really happened here.
Yeah. So, and you really do go a lot into what really happened. Um, One of the things it is that you take on the idea that enslavement in New England was more benign than in the South. Now, I know that among historians that's been disqualified, but among a lot of people, there still lives that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why this?
I don't wouldn't use the word benign. I think slavery in any form, as I love
Right,
to
or
say, is an
less heinous
abomination.
or something
It's
like
an abomination.
that.
I think the conditions in the North were different for climate, for the need of it. But no, I mean your property, and I don't know. I don't think I would use the word benign. I would more say it's different. As Lydia Mariah Child said, while we bestow our earnest disapprobation on the system of slavery, talking about Northerners, let us not flatter ourselves that we are in reality any better than our brethren in the South. So it's the soil, it's the climate, but that doesn't mean the spirit, the thought is not there. And
Oh,
certainly,
yeah, that's what I meant by I'm saying you take it on. You're trying
yeah.
you saying it's just simply not happening. And I was particularly impressed by you found some traces of people who had been particularly bad to their servants or slaves, to the people around them, and who eventually got warned out of town. Which I found there's so much hiding of bad behavior in some ways that I was really surprised that you even managed to find that.
Well, because it was legal. I mean that had a lot to do with it. But I found almost exclusively that, there were, let's say, and I hate using the word better slave owners in certainly as regards to physical torment or treating an enslaved person. But it's just uh, it's totally dependent on the master as to how uh, this person is treated. It is up to them. So if they want to beat their slave, that's okay. And the law is on the side of the master and not of the enslaved person. I can't think of anything crueler to us today than a little child being sold, a 2-year-old being sold away. And so if the mother was present or the mother wasn't present, there your family, uh, you had no say in, you didn't live together as a couple.
And
You
all of
stayed,
yeah,
yeah,
and
you
all of that
stayed.
was encoded in the laws here too.
Yes, yes.
That's
So
right.
you lived with your master if you were both enslaved, and the other one, and the child would live typically with the mother, but but they had no say. The mother, the father had no say. If your child was 2 years old and the master decided to sell the child, then the child was sold. And I think today that's just gut wrenching. It really is to think about.
What impressed me is that you did not, of course, or you did not find hundreds of people having been enslaved in Wayland, in Sudbury, um, but you found enough instances to have a whole gamut of to find a whole gamut of relationships and activities, like a 2-year-old being sold away from the
Mhm.
mother, and an owner who had successive enslaved people who were trying to run away, because and then it turns out that the guy was beating everybody within sight, and they ended up warning him out of town. And people who, very few who actually taught their what they called servants, to read, a whole gamut of different kinds of relationships and activity, but then you have a chapter called The Personal Lives of the Enslaved, or I can't remember what the name of the entire chapter is.
Of property, the personal life of property.
Property, and you talk about the limits, the fact that people could not marry, they could marry, but they could not marry without permission, and that all of this is also here, just like in the South, encoded in law, and all of it was there in Sudbury and Wayland. So that suggests that if you find it there, then you're going to find it everywhere, right? I mean, if you find that gamut of
Mhm.
relationships and activities.
Every town is unique and every town is the same in many respects.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think that I hope someday there really is a picture of what slavery really was here because people like to think it was benign. And I think there was a massive cover up too after enslavement ended. And even with Lydia Mariah Child, who I love and study all the time, but she's writing, her book about, the Africans, and she's writing it when there is no enslavement in the North, and so she can say that it's in the South, but it's also at the very start of the abolitionist movement. So I think, and if you read about Thomas Stearns died in 1844, said there's no slavery, and he meant in Sudbury, because it's not here, and therefore I think we're covering it up. I think we're doing abolition, uh, has started, and so now we're taking great pride up here that we were not, really so bad, as the South is the one that has the real problem.
right. And that's a
And I,
topic
I
in
think
this
that
own.
I think it was just a long game of hiding the truth.
Yeah. You talk some about the 1790 census, about the sort of de facto outlawing of slavery after the court cases that
Right.
followed on the Massachusetts Constitution, and that there were no enslaved listed in the 1790 census, even though there was a category. And that always reminds me of our tax form, on which there is way below everywhere. You get to put a thing called other income, basically,
Mhm.
income. This is this person to Al Capone, who was caught for not
Mhm.
not not
Mhm.
reporting his illegal income. And so you talk about that a little bit. You found one instance in which people basically were saying, well, we don't have any enslaved, but by the same token, the person still does not have any kind of freedom or
Well, I
still,
mean, it wasn't like they were paid for what they were doing for their masters,
right,
and they had no property. And I have to say that, the women are just totally, I mean, women in colonial society certainly had very little status, but freed women were even worse off, I think, than the men, because men will appear in poll records, but
right,
not women.
right.
So you can identify, and some of them I found some of the people who had been enslaved, I actually found through poll records after the fact, but no
So can
women.
you explain what that is for if there's
Okay,
any?
the poll record it was a tax, and supposedly you had to pay a poll tax to be able to vote. Now it's unclear how much voting was done by Black people, and I don't think there's any much evidence that there was, but you were assessed a poll tax, and it only if you were a man. So women did not even. I mean, women in colonial times are pretty much servants too, if not slaves. But that's a whole different topic that I don't get into. But
So
I do certainly say that. But so these people that are supposedly freed, they're living with their ex-master's household because they have no place to go. They have no opportunity. What now enslavement is ended, but certainly prejudice, has
Right.
never ended, in my opinion, but that's beside the point.
So I think one interesting question is, you know, how prevalent is it that people are still practicably enslaved, even if they're not considered property that
Hmm.
left to
Right,
someone else?
right, right.
But even then, there's this one man who he doesn't leave his wife, his enslaved person, but he says that the person is
Yes.
the direction under her direction. So there's sort of an implicit uh,
Hmm. That
owner.
you owe me something and that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
here to serve.
It's be interesting to see if somebody will ever be able to do a widespread study on that and that practice.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the owner of the Wayside Inn in Sudbury. So he was a prominent slave owner,
That's right.
Ezekiel Howe.
Noise is, yeah. Um, let's see. I I wanted to move on to talk a little bit more about creating the manuscript and publishing, but I'm wondering if there are any questions about what is in the book and on enslavement that I should ask. Somebody asked the question that we just talked about, right? Did it just end new sales? Cicely Miller asks a question that we have largely gone through, but not entirely. Massachusetts abolished enslavement in 1783, according to one of our local historians. Is this true? Did that just end new sales? Were people still living enslaved? So the answer to, I think Jane just answered, where people were still living enslaved. I think it probably did end sales because those are recorded. Those, and I don't know whether it
There,
would
there
hit the
was
black
no
market. I don't know.
Yeah, there was no law passed specifically
Right.
on a Commonwealth level or whatever that ended slavery. So it was taken that the court cases, especially the one with Clark Walker in 1783, kind of verified that the 1780 Constitution of Massachusetts did not condone slavery. So it kind of it didn't die, it faded away. Is that a good way to put it? And so there was no formal ending, and it is unknown how much the concept of slavery and treating enslaved people, as if they were still enslaved, but also the revolution played a major part in sort of the breakdown of that whole institution.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's many factors at play, but it never had a formal ending here. It had, as I say, more of a fading away kind of aspect. There was no statewide, Commonwealth-wide law decreeing that it ended.
yeah.
Like, but I didn't find in any probate records that I found of former slave owners in the 1780s, I did not find any mention of enslaved people.
We do have another question I just want to point out before we get too much further afield, asking how to find records of sales, like asking essentially, is there a central,
No,
um,
it's
so
it's sort of the
yeah,
luck of the draw. Um, Sudbury had this wonderful uh, online, s- the town of Sudbury in the 90s um, had decided that they wanted to digitize their information and put it online. And so when I started, there was even information there, but no, it's pretty much you have to go to the town, you have to go to for example, the enslaved people that was owned by Ezekiel Howe are in the Wayside Inn archives, but they're now all on the Sudbury archives, which is an online uh, site that you put something in and you can find what you want. All town meeting records are there. So no, is there a central repository for sales? Uh, no, in fact, one is at the Wayland Historical Society. It was in a file.
So,
That's
so I think family records is where you find things like that, mostly in family collections.
yeah.
And then if somebody has pulled it out already. Kevin Delaney had a question for you.
Yeah, this is a
What do
question
you think,
that
Kevin?
hi Jane.
Hey,
That inquires into some of the particulars about Wayland. One thing that Jane mentioned early on before we started that I was a history teacher in Wayland for a long time, and I brought groups of students to the Old North Cemetery quite a bit over the years. And there's a couple of gravestones that Jane refers to in her book that are really fascinating, and I'm wondering what sorts of inferences you make about these gravestones. As you point out in the book, Jane, they are the gravestones of a person named Peter Booz and another person who is named Flora. She
right,
just has a
right.
first name. And also, as you point out, and you can't help but notice this in the ancient part of the cemetery where all of the graves faced east, these are the only two graves in this. This is like the original Sudbury Cemetery that are perpendicular to all the others, and they're from the early 19th century. So I always sort of imagined that these two individuals were at one point enslaved, and then very likely somehow freed, and whatever that status looked like. But it also always struck me, and my high school students too, that they had actual gravestones at the cemetery, even though they were at right angles, and they were either near or in family plots. And I was
Yeah, John
wondering
Noyes.
what sort of inferences you make based upon that kind of complicated, those complicated kind of artifacts as they're situated there.
My conclusion is that they were enslaved. Um, and I could find none. What I really struggled over, and I can't document anything one way or the other, and looked up, I can't tell you how long I spent trying to figure out why they were buried facing a different direction. And then I go to Sudbury, and there is one grave there, and it is Simeon, and who belonged to Josiah Richardson, and he is not turned at any. So I have found no pattern that I could recognize or document that said that an enslaved person had to be buried there. Perhaps it was where there was space behind John Noyes's grave that forced them to be put in that configuration, but I went through the sun rising and the sun setting and everything else, and I never got a good answer as to why they were buried that way. I now am conclude because I did the poll tax, and Peter Booz had a poll tax, but for the first few years, the poll tax was to someone called Peter Noyes. And then all of a sudden it changed to Peter Booz, and it's the same person. And therefore, I think you could draw a very strong uh, correlation between that and the fact that he belonged to John Noyes. So he was, I mean, what I always said is when he died and Flora died, they were not slaves. But
Right.
had they been slaves, yes, they had been. And Flora, of course, you would get no record more of her than a gravestone. And where are all the other
Right.
enslaved people in Sudbury, Wayland, whatever, buried? There's no markers for them. I know in Lincoln there's one marked grave of an enslaved person. I think in Weston there's none. And they, where are they? They had to be buried with no marking whatsoever.
Yeah, one observation too that I didn't make, I don't think, in my question was that they both refer to the individuals as, Peter Boo's a colored man and Flora a colored woman.
Hmm.
And then, they're near each other, but not in the same exact
Hmm.
plot. But always kind of an interesting kind of historical enigma there. What can we infer based upon that, which is pretty tricky, but impossible not to
Well,
imagine a little bit.
that the Noyes family had enough money to want
Yeah,
to designate uh,
yeah,
some
Well,
kind of memorial.
isn't that interesting though? Because it really truly puts the lie to that idea of people being a member of the family. You know, they set great store by putting birth dates and death dates uh,
Hmm.
on markers, but of course you have to pay per letter, right?
Hmm.
So, but then why put a colored man or a colored woman? And that is like the most important thing to say about this person. That tells you everything about the way they're thinking, right?
Yes. But it's also like Ezekiel Howe at the Wayside Inn. He wrote in the codicil of his will that Portsmouth should have a Christian burial, his enslaved man who was no longer enslaved.
Right.
And nobody knows where that is.
So a wooden cross, probably, right?
But so
A
the
pauper's
people
grave.
the people at the
yeah.
Wayside Inn says he's at the Wayside Inn someplace. But if he's at the Wayside Inn property someplace, it's not marked.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you,
it's
Jane.
like,
Yeah,
Or not make
interesting.
marked anymore.
yeah.
I wanted to start segueing to because we're talking about authors and publishing here today. I wanted to start segueing um, to talking about the process of writing and creating a manuscript and all of that. And so in your acknowledgments, you talk about doing research online versus in documents. And I thought that would be a good place to start. Because do you, I mean, uh, as we all are so very happy about, you rightly are very happy that you can sit in your armchair and do a lot of stuff. But is there something to be had for going places and finding things?
Not
Looking
if
at
they
them.
send you the scans. So if they send you transcriptions, um, then you need to see the original. But if you get the scan, you're okay. I started out life in the 90s or whatever, around 2000, with microfilm wills, probate records at Mass Archives.
Yeah.
And, because and kind of followed that way. The Wayside Inn Archives at that time was at the Martha Mary Chapel, and there was snow, and I trudged down there. Now they're on the Sudbury Archives website, no problem. So, no, yeah, I hate to say this, but the pandemic, I would offer to go to these places, to wear masks and gloves and all kinds of things and go to the mass archives. And they said, no, 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 we'll send it to you. And, and that's what they did. And in Concord, the Concord archivist, um, again, I needed to see these records because of the connection between somebody who lived in Sudbury who had connections to Concord. And I wanted to see the town meeting records. I wanted to see poor records. And I've received over 200 scanned images
Mhm.
of records to my computer. So, I mean, this revolution in technology was, what was just I just, couldn't figure out, I'm not the most technologically savvy person, Clune, you know that. But but wow, it was just an amazing experience to see the changes in that time period. It was like another world. That I just, and I still don't handle it. That's why I have grandchildren and children who are tech savvy. They help me a lot.
Right.
Um, well, I always, I mean, I'm much of a user of online technology, and I love it. But I also feel that that if you go talk to an archivist, you sometimes end up with more, that you somehow trigger an idea or whatever in conversation.
Well, but we had conversations online because they were all lonesome.
Yeah. Oh, good. That was good.
So one of the things is like we'd love to send you the stuff. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for any questions you have. And so I had with Caitlin Jones at the Mass Archives. I mean, we had constant contact, and maybe we didn't talk, but we were emailing several times a day. So I didn't feel that. Sometimes
Right.
if there's a lot of people at a place and you're trying to do work, they have no time for you. Anyway, this time they had all the time in the world to help me in any way they could, and they just bent over backwards. It was amazing.
So you've talked about essentially having worked on this research for 20 to 25 years.
Yes, I did.
But you probably, as you're alluding to here, at some point you said, I'm going to do a book and I'm going to really start working on it sort of pointedly. What was that? How long did you work
Okay,
on?
so when I was working on it, in the early, so it all started in Concord, where I found out from Bob Gross's The Minutemen and Their World that there were enslaved people in Concord at the start of the American Revolution, and I found this ghastly, and then I found a book at the Northbridge Visitor Center that really changed my life, and it was called The Negro in Colonial New England by Lorenzo Breen. And I've worn out 3 copies of it. I call it my Bible. And that really gave you a picture, written in 1942 by a Black professor. I was sort of lost for history. It was a vanity press item when I bought it in the late 80s. And it's now taken its place and been resurrected. But it was just an amazing book to me. And as I say, it really changed my life. But I was working full time. So I found out a lot more probably about Concord enslavement than I did about Wayland. But at some point, I just decided that for my own fun, that, maybe Concord had enslaved people, but certainly Wayland never did. And that was the inspiration to check on that. And boy, was I wrong, as you well know. And so, but I compiled, I went to the Mass Archives, I went through, you know, collected papers wherever I could find them. And then I had this all assembled in a notebook. And in 2017, when I retired from the park, I decided I'm going to take them out and look at them again. And so I looked at them and I said, no, now maybe I even have time to go back and really explore things like the Benjamin Crane and William Jennison, those court cases, which are, I think amazing in showing cruelty of a master to an enslaved child. Um, but so I did, and I found in that by this time now American Ancestors had the court records on, and the Mass Archives sent me whatever else they could do. And then I said to my husband, well, I want this to go out. I want people to see it because nobody's ever done Sudbury enslavement before. And I said, I want it on a website or whatever. And he's the one who said, and he'll verify that I give him credit for this, you should write it as a book. And so I started to think of it in that way. And that was really the inspiration for it. But then the question arose, if you want to ask it as a separate question, so how do you get a book out of what you do? And I had no concept of how to do that. I hadn't a clue in the world. I had written some books for the Park Service, and I write the texts and they take it from there and publish it. But yeah, So I don't know if you want to ask a follow-up question or you want me to just babble on.
Well, no, I certainly, because I said I have the question in your acknowledgments. You mentioned text separately from the timeline in the back. And so the back of the book has a many page, let me see, let me find
Yeah,
it. And I'll hold it
appendix.
up. It has a timeline with all the primary evidence that Jane has for
And many examples of things I couldn't find a story from, but just
right,
had a piece of evidence of an enslaved person.
right,
And so that inspiration was given to me by Donahue, and eminent professor of environmental studies, now retired at Brandeis. And he said, you should have a spreadsheet. And so I was like, I don't know how to make a spreadsheet. So I talked to my granddaughter who was in college at the time. And I said, well, should I pay somebody to do a spreadsheet? She said, Grandma, just ask me. I'll do it for you. And she had it done in Word and Excel in about an hour. So, and then I kept adding to it. But, step one is you've written the book, and then the decision is made to you want to get it published. And then having absolutely no idea what to do, I was very, very fortunate to have some wonderful people that sat with me who all had a lot of knowledge on local history, and including Kevin, who was my first reader of the book, and made some suggestions that actually changed the whole book. Um, but people that had the expertise, and they sat with me, and at some point they said, this spreadsheet has to be part of the book. One of them in particular said this. It has to be part of the book because there's so much information in it.
right.
So I asked History Press, because you're going to ask me how I got to History Press. But I asked History Press, if that could be included in the book, and they said yes. So, and what it is it really gives you the sources, the notes, but it gives you many references to people that I couldn't do a full story on, but certainly you get the feeling that there's much still to find out. And
Yeah.
and if it's not me, I hope it's somebody else sometime.
I want to just step back for 1 second, back to the making of the book, and then I want to step forward
Okay.
on what you just said. And that is that I was wondering how you managed to come up with the chapter divisions. So you basically essentially have you talk about the 17th century and the 18th century, and then you start talking about different sources, or the Revolutionary War and different sources. How did you end up with that division? What,
Okay, so
that
so
you
number
want to
one
talk
thing,
about?
I had spent many, many years preparing
Oh, I
programs.
can't hear you,
Oh,
Jane.
yeah.
For some reason,
Rachel, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good, Jane.
can
Yeah.
others hear Jane?
Yeah.
Coming
Okay,
through
so
good.
for some reason my sound just went off. Oh, it was recording me. Can you tell me, can you talk now?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no. For some reason it started recording in a message what I was I must have touched my keyboard or something. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
So
don't hear
so
you.
I had a lot of experience preparing programs, giving talks for years and years, not just at the park, but I worked at Orchard House, the old band. So I was kind of used to, organizing information. So I remember what I did is I took different topics and time periods, or tried to think of breaking it up, and I stapled them together, or I pinned them together with a paper clip, and then I kind of arranged them to see what made sense. But it wasn't, as I say, really, it was something that I was used to doing. So it
Right,
wasn't as stressful for me, perhaps, as somebody who's never done it before.
Right. So it's really your experience in doing
Yes.
programs and
Yeah.
doing, and I think that that's really valuable because for a lot of people, they've done a lot of work that's adjacent to writing a book, but they haven't written a book.
Hmm.
But you can
Right.
still use that experience to
Yes,
put together a
absolutely.
manuscript,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um,
If you are you good at organizing things or used to organizing things, that's really a big step.
that really helps. Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about publishing. I was wondering, did you have any earlier choices over the history? It's published with the History Press, which is an imprint of Acadia. Uh,
Hmm.
and I was wondering whether you had any other choices on the table. What made you choose them?
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so what happened is I had this little group of some were old friends, some were new friends, and they were, and one of the things that we had to discuss was how to get it published, because that's a whole different, you know, I mean, I could write the book, but how to take it from there, um, I needed help, and I found this small group of people who were wonderful to me and helped me. And I had set, and so one of them was, how we, grant money, where are we going to get money to get the book published? Well, number one, I had the backing of the executive director, Rachel Robinson of the Sudbury Historical Society. And I think that was very important, was to have, and she also, but unbeknownst to me. So we talked about things and she had the manuscript, and unbeknownst to me, she sent it to History Press. I had nothing to do with it. And a couple of days later, I get this message saying, "Congratulations, your book has been accepted to History Press." So did I, and so that was that was very simple in that regard as to how. So yeah, we were thinking about it, but we hadn't pursued anything but that. But she kept saying, "Well, if you have History Press do it, then one, we don't have to find grant money or whatever else there was to it." She also told them that she would buy 200 copies of the book if it came out. And she did.
Dangling a little.
And she did. And I think
Right.
so I think she was very significant in its being accepted. Besides that, they liked the book because they won't take it if they don't like it. But um,
So It Takes a Village works also in the production of books, not just the production of
right,
children.
right, right.
All right. Well,
And
we
they were
know.
my village and they were wonderful. Kevin is one of the wonderful villagers that I was lucky enough to have help me.
Um, I think this is really good to know because I think there are a lot of people who have been doing research for a long time, and one of the things they don't want their research to get lost, and so they
Mhm.
find some kind of forum in which to bring it out and put it down and tie it down to a piece of paper or something like that, and that's one of the beauties of you having your entire spreadsheet in here because that being the heart of what you've done,
Mhm.
it really communicates to someone else who can take it and run with it. And that's sort of the spirit in which we often publish these books, isn't it?
So I think some people went for websites. I noticed that some, historical societies went for websites. That certainly was nothing I was in any way, shape, or form able to do. So what do I relate to? I relate to a book because that's that's what I grew up with.
Well, I think as any archivist will tell you, if you want to come up with one piece of way in which to preserve a piece of text that's not going to go bad tomorrow, then
Hmm.
it needs to be a book, right?
Hmm.
Or on paper in any
Hmm.
case. So uh forget all the electronic records because as soon as somebody forgets to, do something, there they go, right? And we
Hmm.
don't know when that will happen.
Right.
Um, did you learn anything from the publishing process that you wish you'd known that
Yes.
you actually understood while you were working on the book?
Yeah, understood nothing. So everything I learned that, well, what I had to do as part of the publishing process is I had to do the index. I had to do the bibliography. I had to do the acknowledgments. I did the spreadsheet. So all of it, all the frills that went with it, was all done by me, and I would have had no idea that I needed to do all that. And I'll tell you something, doing an index is a nightmare, or it was for me. I
Did
don't
you
know.
do it by hand or did you use
I
AI?
used the Word index, and but what I did is I had it on my Mac, the Word for Macs, and what I found out after attempts to follow the directions for indexing with Word, that it didn't apply to Macs, and that you actually had to finally watched millions of videos to try to figure out what did apply to Macs, because they had no book that said indexing for Mac users. And
Right.
so I found that very stressful. And then I had a good friend who I worked with at the park for many, many years, who's very, very, he's very careful. And so I asked him to be the person who checked it. And so he did that, and that helped me a lot. So I lived through it barely, but I did.
But you survived, huh?
And I found it very unpleasant. Sorry about that.
Um,
I just talked to somebody who wrote the book on Lincoln's Black history and asked him why it didn't have an index. And he said, because indexes are nightmares to do. And I said, I can understand.
I think that it might start to get easier now if we can get AI to do it. So Mike
Yes,
McCluskey
yes,
has Mike has his hand up, and Mike had commented previously that Jane's spreadsheet inspired me to do the same. So here you go,
yes,
Mike.
yes. He told me that. Thank you,
Good.
Mike. And thank you, and all the help you gave me, and names to contact. I appreciate that.
The question I have for you, in terms of formatting it for publication, did you have to change your font size, page size, and
Yes.
all of this to accommodate the publisher?
Yes, it had to be
My,
done.
my,
Certain things had to be read, certain things had to be, you know, different fonts. Yes, it had to be submitted exactly as they asked me. And I have a very nice daughter who's a college professor who's used to doing this kind of thing, and she put it together for me so that it followed exactly what they wanted. But yes, that was, and this indented and not this indented, yes. So,
so,
so there was equal work, I think, to writing the book, was
so
to,
in terms of formatting, you had to have it in the final format, the final font, page size, everything else, before you began indexing it, because the indexing tied your paragraph um, to the page notation. So in terms of sequencing it, you had
okay.
to have it in the proper format before you could index it. Is that
No,
correct?
no, that is, no.
No.
No, they didn't care. They just wanted it indexed, and the page that it was then.
Okay.
And then they took it from there, and it wound up at the right pages. So that's a mystery to me, but no, I did not have to do that.
That's good. Was that the question you wanted to ask, Mike?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you, Mike, for your help and suggestions.
Quite welcome.
Um, I have a few questions that I thought, since this is the first in a series, I thought I have a few questions that I will ask every author. And I will ask them because that way we end up with something where we can compare, different modes of publishing and different publishers. Just seemed like an idea. So I have these questions, and some of it you've already answered, but in some ways. But so
Okay.
one question I have is, were they hard or easy to get in touch with?
very easy.
Very
Now
easy.
they're harder, but
They were
they always responded very quickly, and anything that that the problem was I didn't always know the right questions to ask.
okay. That
Anything I asked them, they answered. But I found out a lot of things I should have asked that I didn't know. But that was, I don't think their fault. They did send this 24 pages notes for authors, and it was helpful, but it didn't answer all the questions that arose. But I just didn't know it. But when I learned the questions, they answered those.
Uh-huh. Well, because my second question was, did they provide clear guidelines? And you're saying yes, but you also had questions outside of that, or you did things in such a way that they didn't want it out of.
No, I think I just didn't know certain things to ask at that time, but they always, they were in constant communication with me. So they were very responsive. They did the design of the cover, for example, which I think they did a beautiful job on, and obviously had a lot of talent there. They were very good at what they did in terms of producing local history.
Um, uh, how long did it take from start to finish?
Too long.
Was that because of you or because of them?
Um, no, it wasn't because of me. It was you get on a list, and like you take a number at the bakery or something,
Right,
and when your number comes up. So I think I submitted it in like November of 23,
right.
the final, and it didn't come out till January of 25.
So they may have, yeah, they may have wanted to do it early in the year because of Black History Month.
No, I said that. They
Ah,
actually wanted to put it off until March or April, and I said
okay,
I wanted it for Black History Month, and miraculously they could accommodate that.
that's
So,
great.
yeah,
That's great. So
I am.
you've already answered this question. I asked, was there someone you could call or email with questions? And you said yes, right?
Yes.
And did you have to edit your own manuscript? Did they have a proofreader for you?
They had a proofreader. Since I am of an age where I learned to spell and punctuate,
Yeah,
they had very little to say. They did not change my words or suggest they found really clerical errors. And I had all the chance I wanted to. I actually came across something even after the so-called deadline, after the final was submitted, and asked if I could add it because I thought it was very important. It had just shown up, and it was the Frank Benson with Thomas Stearns writing on the back about ministers who shouldn't own slaves.
that was
Um,
very important.
that was lost for for 20 years, that bill of sale.
So this is basically a bill of sale of one of the people that,
It was a bill of sale so this man named Thomas Stearns, who died in 1844, he was a Sudbury, collected uh, old documents. And at some point, I don't know if it was him or a later member of the family, he gave half of it to the Goodnow Library, half his papers to the Goodnow Library in Sudbury, and half to the Mass Historical Society. And I kept writing the Mass Historical Society about wanting to see it. They didn't answer me. And finally, I read that in 2005, they gave that box to the Goodnow Library. So they had the whole collection. And the Goodnow Library couldn't find the box for years because it was in the back of a closet.
uh-huh.
And yes,
So what this is it's a bill of sale for an enslaved person, and the enslaved person is someone that Jane writes about in the
yeah,
book,
yeah.
and on the back of it, a later descendant
No, this Thomas Stearns,
Oh,
before
the
he
collector.
died in 1844, he says, how could a minister own a slave? It's the most awful thing in the world. This is in dying in 1844. There were ministers in the South, maybe they weren't in the North, but there were ministers who owned slaves. And I went to the Goodnow and I made sure it was indeed his handwriting,
Yeah.
that he did write this. And so it was lost. And finally, it was a new local studies person, and she happened to be cleaning out a closet one day, and she found the second box. And she was so nice. She said, I didn't open it. She called me. I came down, and she said, I want you to open the box. And
Oh,
there,
that is really nice. So,
she was,
so I think what is amazing is that he says he says, how can this happen in this land of boasted liberty,
yes,
right?
yeah. How
Which
could a
is
minister own a slave? It was a really awful
in
thing.
this
And it
land,
was just, and so that's again kind of confirms the fact that the North did not want to think of itself
right?
as a place where slaves uh
I'm thinking that we need a book called Land of Boasted Liberty.
I
Sorry.
like that, huh?
I
Yeah,
thought it was a very eloquent phrase, really.
perhaps Rachel
Um,
could do that.
okay, so let me just, did you have to pay to publish? This is my list, right?
No, I did not pay, but I don't make very much, but that wasn't the point. The
Right, but
point
you never make very much.
was to get the information out, but I did have to pay, for example, any graphics that I didn't get for free, I had to pay for.
Right.
And I paid for paper and all the, things, but no, it was, pocket money, not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
for,
this is for you making the manuscript, essentially. You paid for that, but you didn't pay for the
no.
publishing process.
No, or the public or the PR either.
Right. And
Yeah.
what about the layout and art? You said you had already answered that, right? They did that.
Well,
Uh,
the graphics were all submitted. I picked the graphics, and they were all submitted by Rachel Robinson, who happens to be a whiz
right.
at that. So that was wonderful. And then they took it from there, where the layout, the cover, that they did, not me.
And you said the PR, they're doing PR for,
Well, what they did is they sat with me, asked me to make out a list of places that I should contact, I wanted them to contact, and then they contacted them and sent them information. If somebody wanted to read a book, they sent them that. And they sent me postcards and things like that. So they did that. But the funny thing is that for example, the program I'm doing tomorrow, which is for the Congregational Library and Archives, the reason I got called, I didn't put that down. They saw it on your website on the Mass History Alliance, and then they contacted me. So, and that's happened several times. So, you know, the
great
word spread.
organization, the
Yes,
Congregational Libraries. And I bet you they have a lot of those ministers who own slaves. Actually, they would be a great sponsor of a study.
well, my star of my book is
Yeah.
Reverend Loring, who was a congregational
And who
minister in
wrote his
Sudbury for 66 years. Yes,
right, and he wrote about in his diary about his own enslaved persons enslaved in his own household, and then also about others, right?
yes. So
Yeah,
he's the main man.
right.
And
It's always important.
I'm glad I read his journals 25 years ago, because his handwriting and it was very tough.
When I was starting my dissertation, I remember my professor said to me, "Okay, pick your text and write your dissertation, and you always need to have one or two main texts that really encompass what you're doing." So,
Mhm.
um, okay, so who wrote the blurbs and the PR text? Did you write all that?
They wrote the back one, which they thought the one on the back cover, because they wanted to, I think, because of the, highlighting the lives of men, women, and children including a court case involving the enslaved boy repeatedly beaten and left scarred by his master. They wanted that in there.
Yeah,
I
so there's a little bit
I
of
changed it because the way things were shaping up, I wasn't just talking to a Wayland or Sudbury audience, and I wanted people to know. So I wrote the other blurbs because I wanted people to know that it wasn't, that it went beyond that town and that there were other towns involved and there was, sort of a wider frame of reference than just you were going to learn about Sudbury and Wayland, you're going to learn about slavery in the North, and you're going to learn about even interactions between towns. So I changed that.
good for you. Okay, Cicely Miller says, how do we get the book? I will post you can order it from the History Press. Let me find the book again, the link again. Here it is, from Arcadia Publishing, right? And then I'm sure that there are other places where you can order
You
it.
can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble in Natick and Burlington. I noticed that they have it. Um, you can get it at the Sudbury Historical Society because you
That's a
bought
good
the.
place to get it.
And
Did it have an
it's
online
nice
store?
too. I think the Wayland Historical Society is working on it, but I haven't gotten definite word about it yet.
Right, right.
And hopefully when the Wayland Depot opens, which is a town-run consignment shop, that they will carry it too, but they're closed in the winter. So that's
Okay.
another thing things are going to open up, the Wayside Inn as well, but the gift shops and certain places because of the weather here have not opened up yet.
Right. So somebody, Chris Doral says, looking forward to getting my copy signed by you. Me too, although I hardly ever see you in person.
You will.
But I'll come to one of them, that's for sure. And Cecily Miller says I don't support Amazon, so I would definitely suggest. Oh, if you want a deal, maybe, but otherwise, I would suggest going to Arcadia or one of the historical
Yeah,
societies.
yeah. And Barnes
Uh,
and Noble, yeah. If you don't like Amazon, I can understand your feelings about
right.
Amazon. Yes.
So I have two final questions. The first one
Okay.
is, are you gonna planning on writing another book?
At the moment. I think I'd like to keep working on this one. So
That sounds good to me. And then, but also, I feel like you have some Lydia Mariah Child maybe in your.
well, I've done a lot with Lydia Mariah Child, so I've given programs and talks about her and the wonderful book that Lydia Moland had written about Lydia Mariah Child, A Radical Life. So
Yeah,
there are some good books, but yes, I'm determined to make her a star in Wayland because almost nobody ever has heard of her here, very sadly,
yeah,
and
that
I
is
think
very
she's
sad.
well worth hearing. There's no school, no anything named for her in Wayland, and she's still here at North Cemetery. So yeah, she deserves a lot better than she's getting right now.
She does, and I'm sure you will make that happen too. So
Well,
I have one
I
question.
have a partner in crime now. The new director of the Wayland Historical Society is also a big fan of hers.
Good. So I have a final question, and that's the elephant in the room, the National Park Service. Are friends getting laid off? What's happening?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, very much so. I get Facebook. One of the most wonderful things is I have Facebook. I don't put very much on it, but I asked my granddaughter to post that I was that I had a book, and most of the responses were from people I worked with over the years at the park, congratulating me, telling me they bought the book. And that's been very gratifying because, we worked very hard there to interpret history in the way it should be interpreted. But yes, are they suffering greatly right now?
Oh, that is really, really, really too
Yeah,
bad.
it's getting worse, and I don't know if you saw, but he has a new thing coming out saying that all parklands should be exploited for fossil fuels and everything else. So that's, that's coming out, and every day they have posts that, that say how sad this is going to be.
Yeah, it's
So,
really too bad.
yeah.
Ugh. Um, is there anybody else who has any other questions for Jane? I'm hoping to see you one of these days, Jane.
Okay.
When is this program in Concord? What's the date on that?
It's March 29th.
Oh,
You're in way.
that's the third thing on March 29th.
That's March 29th.
Are you doing another in-person event?
Um, yeah, it'll be at the Wayside Inn. Doing it, but I forgot the date already. It's like in July. They're doing a thing on Rev 250, and they want to do all aspects. And so I'm slavery.
Right.
And I'm doing it in person at the Good Now Library in Sudbury in April. So yeah, and the Natick Library. So yeah, I have some real, if the weather holds up.
Is there a place where we can find a list of everything you're doing?
I can send it to you. Um, yeah, I'll send it to you. I should post it someplace.
Yeah, I'm wondering how that would be interesting to figure out a good place to post that. Um, uh, I wish I wanted to come on the 29th, and now I have to give a talk myself on the 29th. So that's not
Okay.
going to happen.
Okay.
Sorry.
No.
Well, everybody, I would definitely recommend that you read this. It is a wonderful book, and the way Jane brings people to life about whom she knows very little, but with the empathy and like I called it, historical imagination, and that is not the same as imaginary history. Um, it is really, really good, and I hope everybody orders it, and you get lots of lots of money in in funds from the History Press and everybody else. And I'm hoping everybody also will join us next week when we're talking about whose funding is at risk due to fluctuations in federal activities. And that is, if you go to the Mass History Commons website, you will find the link for that. And I think it's here somewhere too, right? Are we going to send out the chat on this one, Rachel? Can we do that? And anything?
We can send it out to all the attendees afterwards.
That sounds really great if we can. Thank you. That way everybody has everybody's name. Jane, thank you so much.
Well, thank
It's
you.
really
It's been a
wonderful to talk
pleasure.
to you and hear more about the process. Rachel, thank you for all your work in making this happen. Mike, thank you for all your support of the Mass History Alliance. Who else do I see here who I have to thank? Tom, thank you for your work, and Kevin on this book. And I'm wishing you all a really good rest of the week with less ice, although it's still going to be cold.
Thank you, Bloom.
See
It
you
has been
in
a
a couple of
pleasure.
weeks for the next one.
Bye.
Oh, I forgot the recording. Sorry.
That's okay. It'll be posted.
Oh, Pat Kennedy is here. Hi, Pat.
Thank you.
Great job, Jane and Plume.
Thank you. Hang on for
It
a
was
second.
fun, huh?
Hang on for a second while while we wait for everybody to. And I need to. There. That was great. That was.
Good. Thank you as always. The
I
two
thought.
of you, the dynamic duo, huh?
Between the two of us, we get the commons running, don't we?
Well, it's just people that are such a pleasure to be with and work with. So
Well, thank you. What a great start to this series, you know. So Jane, are you so that Rachel doesn't have to do 5 things at a time, and so that she doesn't have to stay the whole time, are you willing to be the hostess, the MHA hostess on on the next one with David Whiteside on March 12th?
Yeah, let me make sure
And,
that I'm
all you have
here.
to do is that beginning blurb,
Yeah, no, I know. Let me just make sure I'm here. Yes, I
go with
can do it.
Rachel.
I can
Unless
do
Yes,
you
it.
want to do it.
I can do it.
actually, I can't do it because I will be in Europe, so it will be a little late.
Excuse me. Huh?
So we need to work out with someone who can get us into the Mass History Alliance.
Rachel, be careful. There's germs there. That's where I got COVID on the
I always
Danube.
come back with sickness,
Where
and last time it was COVID, but
that was the first time I ever had COVID in June on the Danube River. So where are
Mm,
you going?
get
um,
get your vaccination before you go.
Yeah,
yes, I'm
yeah,
up to date on, or I got my COVID.
good.
I need to see if I can get it again.
Yeah, be really careful. Everybody I know has come back sick, so take care.
Yeah, all the
So
well,
we're
we're based in London and then we're taking the oh my gosh, what's it called? We're taking the train to Paris.
the channel, going through
Yes.
the channel. That's what
Yeah.
I want to do.
It sounds like
I'll
fun.
let you know. It
Okay, good.
yeah, I'm very excited.
It 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 engages all my claustrophobic ideas, but it can't
I
take very long. It's only a few miles. It's only 35 miles or so. Not from London, but under the sea.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like it's just a feat of engineering too.
Also, tell me how to, I want to, because I've never been to the Louvre. I've been to Paris, but I haven't been there, and I just feel like I should be in all the most famous museums because I've been in so many of them. So